Hi, I'm Mal, and welcome to another episode of MiniModelMakes. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to paint a desert-themed base for your armies, using some really simple techniques and some extra bits and pieces to add variety, life, and interest to those bases to make them stand out a bit more. So, without much further ado, we'll crack on, and I'll get the overhead cam set up, and we'll get straight into painting that base for you. So here's our base for our model, and I've got some PVA glue which I've already put into this pot ready to go, and I've got a big old tatty brush to help spread the glue around. Now I'm going to use loads of different textures on this desert base. I'm going to use some of the technical paint, the Agrellan Earth. And I'm also going to use some traditional sand, which I've got here. I've got a tub of fine sand mixed with some gravel. And then just to help as well, I've got another tub which is full of larger rocks. The other thing I'll consider about using is I have a pack of the skulls from Citadel. So here is a box full of skulls. I might put a couple of those on the bases as well, just as an interest point, as it were. The thing with basing models is it's the world's your oyster. Someone once said the best thing about a model sometimes is bases and faces. So if the face of your model looks great and the base of your model looks great, it makes your model look 10 times better than what it would without. So the first thing I'm going to do is with the PVA glue, I'm going to spread it into areas where I want it a bit more built up. Now what I'm going to do is I've not actually finished the model that I'm going to put on this base, so I've got part of the chassis here for it, which I can put into the middle of the actual base itself, and that gives me a rough idea of where my wheels are going to lie, because I don't really want to put too much of the built up areas where the wheels are going to be. So if I keep that model roughly there, I can get some of my PVA glue, really stringy, and just dab it around areas of the model. Where I'm going to want it to look more built up. I'm just putting the straight PVA glue onto there, which you can buy from any art store, or wood glue from a store like B&Q, which we have here in the UK, or any kind of building supplies shop that other people might have. So that's those areas sort of thought about a little bit. Don't need to do a lot, just a couple of the areas. Should be enough there, really. Just going to build up a bit more of the glue. Next stage, there's a couple of ways to do this. You can either dump your base into your box of sand, or you can sprinkle your sand and your rocks on top. Now this is fine sand, which bought from a place called Geek Gaming Scenics. You can buy this sort of stuff at your local hobby shop as well. It's just my local hobby shop didn't really have any in, so I found this company online, very reasonable, £3 or £4 a bag, and they do all sorts of different basing types. They do sand, they do rocks, rubble. I bought some green Necron crystals from them as well for when I paint some Necrons up. Loads of stuff. So look, a really good company, reasonably priced, I'll try and put up the web page on this video when I come around to it, but I've got some scenic sealant here, so it's Geek Gaming Scenics, and there's the website if you want to go to that in the UK. As I said, very reasonably priced, seems a good company, plenty of stuff on offer to choose from and decide over. So there, I've just put some of my sand on. I built up some of the rocks. I'm going to do exactly the same over here now with the other one. The beauty of this is I'm in my man cave. My wife never comes in here, so I can afford to get it a little bit messy, and I'll just get the handheld hoover out later and suck up all the sand that spill. If you're having trouble with your PVA, you can use a bit of super glue if you're feeling frivolous to get some of the bigger rocks and things down. To try and do is get a bit more PVA on this section here. Of course I'm going to get sand all over it now, but just to put a few more of the larger rocks to give it that little bit of appearance that it's a desert sort of badland. You can use the sealant as well that I showed you in the bottle, which I will be doing in a moment, and that'll help to keep some of it in place also. So you can see that's just darkened up the sand and got it nice and wet there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let that dry, and after it's dried, I am then going to hit that base with my spray. So I've just got some normal Citadel colour Chaos Black. I'm going to spray that all over the base, because that's going to be really important for when I do the next step. So I've now undercoated the base with some of the Chaos Black spray. This is important for two reasons. It helps to seal these large rocks and sand on the base itself, but also it's to provide what I call tooth, a bit of grip for the next stage. And the next stage of this, I'm going to use the technical paint Agrel and Earth, and I've got my texture tool from Citadel. Really simple, just put your Agrel and Earth all over. You can put it on really thickly in places, which will serve you a lot better. You can do it sort of thin in others, but it's simply a case of just piling it on. Now, I used to struggle with these Crackle paints because even though I was putting them on, or what I perceived to put them on as quite thickly, I still wasn't getting much results with the actual Crackle effect. And I've seen loads of videos on Facebook and of how people use these, and I was sort of trying to copy them and just wasn't having any joy. And that was because I wasn't spraying the bases or undercoating the bases first before I started to put this Crackle medium on. And then as soon as I sort of figured out about basing or using a spray first of all before I started this step, actually started getting really nice effects. So if you've been struggling with these Crackle paints in the past and been a bit put off by them, because a lot of people I see on the internet are saying sort of, how do you use these paints, I'm struggling. Just spray or undercoat the bases that you're going to use this on first, and you should see some nicer results. Of course, the big thing is to not be scared to just really pile on this Crackle paint, because wherever it's thickest is where you are going to see the bigger results. I'm coming to the end of this pot of Crackle paint. I'm getting it all over my texture spreading too, which is a good reason why you shouldn't use a brush. I'm just going to give that texture spreader a bit of a wipe. But that's the problem when you get to the bottom of a pot. You've got to get your tool right in there to get all the last bits out, and because I want to lay it on quite thick, it's really a case of scooping out what I've got. That's a good amount there. Of course, anyone who's used this and got any other tips for people out there who are watching this video, please go onto the comment section and tell me about your experiences with this paint. I think it is amazing that we have these paints and effects now to play with. Doesn't matter if you get some on your rocks, it's not going to affect them too much. All I'm doing is covering the areas that haven't covered with the sand. The next stage will help even it out a bit anyway. But this is just a way of creating more textures, making the base look more interesting. You know, make it look maybe like it's was once a dried up riverbed or something along those lines. So our base has now dried. As you can see, putting that base coat down of the Chaos Black before I applied the technical Agrellan Earth paint over the top has given us some wonderful crackles and texture to the entire base. Now, I used to struggle before I figured out to base coat it first. I just used to paint the stuff on and the results were never good. But just giving it a bit of an undercoat first is great. And then what I've done over that is use some more of this Geek Gaming Scenic sealant and just sprayed it over the top, so hopefully I don't lose that texture or it flakes off when I'm dry brushing or painting. But the next stage is going to help anyway. So for the next one I've got some Talon sand, and all I'm going to do for this is I'm just going to stipple that Talon sand over the base to start giving it the same texture, because I don't want it black, I don't want it the Agrellan Earth colour as well, sadly. Just be careful not to, when you first load your brush, overdo it and drown everything in the paint. You're still looking for quite a thin texture. So I'm going to finish that off and then we'll get back to the next step. Okay. The Talon sand is now dry. What I'm going to do for the next stage is use Doomball Brown, and that is going to create a bit of variation now in the base. I'm just going to put some on my palette to the side here, mix a bit of water in with it, nice and thin. What I'm going to do with this area, because I just spilled a drop of water on that, I'm just going to rub that off, is I'm picking out all the stones and the rough sand texture that are left on the base in the Doomball Brown. The Doomball Brown's such a lovely, rich, red-brown colour. What I'm trying to do is replicate the sort of desert rock you'll see, which has got that similar colour. I want it to stand out from the base itself visually to add more interest to the model itself. So that's one area. Picking out some more there. And then I'm looking at this area as well. So what we'll do, I'm going to finish off doing that because it's a really simple stage that you don't really need to follow me too much on it. And we will move on to the next stage after that. Okay. So I'm still waiting for the Doomball Brown to dry. What I'm going to do while I'm waiting for that is I'm going to add a bit more interest to the base, and to do that I've got some I've dug out my box of Citadel skulls, and in there are some orc skulls which you can make out there. I'm going to put probably a couple of those on the base just to break it up a little bit. So I am going to undercoat those with the Wraithbone spray, and I'll get back to you after that. Once more, everything's dry. Our next stage now is we're going to darken it down again with some Agrax Earthshade. I've got a shade brush here, and it's simply just a case of straight from the pot and all over the base. I'm going to start to tie those colours together a little bit. Dab that wash all over the model. You can leave it to pool in the rock areas, that's okay, you don't mind a bit of concentrated darkness in there, but I'm just trying to keep the pooling away from these lighter areas if I can. It's not the end of the world because we're going to dry brush over the top of it anyway. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, we have the skulls from before that have been base coated in Wraithbone, and I'm going to use some of the contrast paint. So our base is now dry, and what we're going to do next is to muddy the water slightly, or should I say muddy the sand. I'm going to create a bit of a blend between the areas that I've done in Doombull and the areas I've done in the Talon sand, while bringing the colour back up. As you can see, the wash we've put down has really accentuated those wonderful cracks from the Crackle paint we used. So I'm going to get some more of our Talon sand. I've got a really soft brush, and I'm going to dry brush again, and I'll just get my paper out. I know it's white, so you're getting hardly any. That's sort of what we're looking for. Too less, if it is going to be too less, is better than too much. We've got our base, and I'm just going to run over sandy areas, and I don't mind too much if I catch the edges of the Doombull areas, because what I'm starting to do, as you can sort of see it in this area, is just really quickly bring out a transition. You know, there's people out there that would use an airbrush for things like this, and it would look amazing, but not everyone has an airbrush. So this is the next best, easiest way of doing it, really. I suppose you could wet blend, but that would just take a lot of time. So I'm just gently running that brush over. As I said, I'm not bothered about catching the edges of these areas. It's a really soft bristle brush, this, which helps tremendously. I'm not, you know, knocking off any bits of Crackle that I've put on. It's just bringing that area up, so I'll finish that off. You can see how I'm making a start with it, and I'll move on to the next stage. So that Talon sand has brought the areas back up and started to create a bit of a smooth transition into the areas of the Doombull brown. The next thing I'm going to do is, it's only slightly lighter, but I'm going to do exactly the same now with Xandri Dust. Same again, rubbing it all off onto a piece of paper, kitchen paper, and it's just a really light, once more subtle dry brush around the edges of our rocky areas, and then over the top of the base. You see the rich red brown of the Doombull is still showing underneath the areas that we're covering with the Xandri Dust. You've still got that lovely variation in colour. It just adds to the subtlety, so I'm not using an airbrush. Same again, I'm just going to give this a good gentle dry brush of that, and we will move on to the next stage. And next stage now is I'm going to create a bit more definition on the base. What I'm going to look at are these heavily crackled areas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick those out with Ushabti bone. Exactly the same as before, it's a really soft bristle brush, the same soft bristle brush, wiping most of the paint off so there's not much left on the brush itself. And I'm going to concentrate on going through these areas here. I'm doing it lightly. I'll do a few layers to it though, because it's going to be quite a heavy dry brush in the end. So we're just starting to get a bit of difference there. Just gradually and patiently building up that Ushabti bone. And with each application you're starting to get that lovely subtle build up. So we've got the actual sand itself, the darker areas of the rocks, and what once was probably some kind of river bed or parched earth starting to come through, and it's a nice gradual transition between the areas. It's starting to come through nicely there. Alright, I'll just tidy that up and we'll get back with the next stage. For our next stage we're going to do more work on the rock sections now, and for this I have Karak stone. Exactly the same as before, our lovely soft bristled dry brush. We have our paper. I'm getting most of the paint off, and then I'm going to work my way over the stones. I've still got a bit too much paint on there, take some more off. picking out these wonderfully textured sections we've done. We've still got that rich red brown underneath, but we're getting some rock texture and that sort of desert edge to them now that they would have. We're just gently building up all this colour again. And we're looking good there now, so I've got some distinct areas of stone. I've got the actual sort of riverbed looking area. Just building up loads of different colours, different texture, adding a bit of interest to this desert base. I'll just tidy that up a little bit and then we'll move on to the next stage. So this next bit now is going to be fun. I'm going to tie up everything onto the base now, and for this I'm going to use Screaming Skull. I'm going to get some out, pop it onto my paper with a brush. Then I am going to get my big soft bristled scenery brush out, pick up some of that Screaming Skull onto the very edge of this lovely soft massive brush, and I am just going to run this all over the base, picking up the colour really gradually. And I'm just going to keep doing that till I feel I'm at the right spot. It's probably going to take a few applications. The brush is too big for the pot, so I have to load it up with a smaller brush. Work it into these big bristles, and then just gently run it over all the base. Getting some wonderful deep texture into this now. It's looking there. I'm just going to go over it again, just tidy it up a little bit, and I'll get back to you shortly. So our layer of Screaming Skull has lightly dry brushed over all those areas. It's really sort of tied the base in together a bit more, and we've got all that wonderful different variation now in texture, while still looking like it's part of the Badlands somewhere, you know, like in America where they've got the Grand Canyon and all those sort of areas with the reddish sort of stone, but the desert itself. What I'm going to do next is we'll pick out the edge now of the base, because as you can see it's quite messy. I've got paint all over it. What I do is I use some white tack to attach it to a painting handle. I've mixed my Abaddon black, which is there, with water onto my palette, and doesn't matter if it's a couple of layers you've got to do. I'm just going to work my way all around the edge. You can see by doing it this way I'm not getting any paint on my fingers. I don't have to hold the base, I don't have to leave it on a table and get paint on the actual table itself. I'm just working my way around the edge. As I said, I've watered it down quite a bit, but I'm happy to do a couple of layers because this black edge is all about. I don't know what other people think about the basing out there. I'm a big fan of black edges. Some people are quite outspoken about it and said you should only do them black. Other people like drab colours, like the Steel Legion drab and things. For you know, if you're doing city fight, possibly do the edges of your bases grey to tie them in a bit more, but can't beat a bit of good old black for everything. So I'll let that layer dry and I'm just going to carry on working my way around the edge. We'll have a nice edge to that base. So while the rim of our base is drying, I've got these skulls which we're using as an interest piece for the base. If you remember, I undercoated these in the Wraithbone and then used the colour contrast skeleton horde on them to bring them up to this point. I've mounted them onto a base with some white tack and put them onto a painting handle so they're easy to paint. I'm using Citadel U Shabty Bone. I've mixed a generous amount of that onto my palette with some water, and I'm now going to pick out the raised areas around the edges of the orbits and running down the side of the head, and I'm going to tidy up some of the sections where the contrast has gone on a bit thick. So if you look on the back of the skull here at this section, you've got like a tea stain. Just going to start gently working over and around that area to bring it back so it's more like a skull. So I'm going to work on these now, picking out all these raised areas, but still leaving areas of the contrast underneath. So we're building up that texture, and I will get back to you when I've finished those. Our Ushabti bone layer has been done now. What I'm going to be doing next is using Screaming Skull. Once again, I've mixed some onto my palette, given it a generous amount of water, and we're looking at highlighting now these areas around the orbits, the teeth, the bridge of the nose, and this sort of raised area here at the corner of the skull, just where the eye socket goes upwards into the skull itself. We're picking out the cheekbones, or the zygoma, medical term there for everybody, and just creating more contrast with these skulls. I'll carry on with those and then I'll get back to you in our next part. So there's our Screaming Skull. We've got really nice contrast to those skulls now. I hope the camera is picking them out for our base. But at the moment I've used Ushabti Bone and Screaming Skull, which is the same paint I've used on the actual base itself. So what I want to do is make the skulls stand out a bit more. And also, if they're out in the sort of boiling, parching sun, they would bleach slightly. So I'm going to use Pallid Witch Flesh now to just bring up a bit more of a highlight to those areas we've been working on. So really it's the same again. I'm just going to pop some of this pallid witch flesh onto a palette. We're putting a little bit of water into it there to make it nice and thin. So the point with this is the thinner it is, the more we can work with it. We may have to do 2 coats, but we're building up a lovely transition of colour. So here's our skulls, and it's very much the same, just working gently on these raised areas. Kind of less is more. I don't know if you can pick up the difference, but you can start to see the difference between the two there. I'm just working around the edges of the areas, and you can pop a bit, you know, a thin layer. It's just some little sort of jagged lines, not quite filling it in properly onto the tops of the skulls themselves, just for a bit of texture. There we go. I'm going to finish those off and I'll show you what they look like on the base. I've glued our skeleton heads that we've worked on onto the bases now. You can see one's there with super glue, and I've popped another one at the back there. The white just makes them stand out just that tiny bit from the rocks. I know it's hard to differentiate in the light, but you can make it out quite clearly from the rock formation there. I'm going to take this off the painting handle I had it on because the rim's dried. What I'm going to do now is just going to add a bit more texture to this base with some things I've had sort of lying around for a long while. I've got some of the Vallejo pigments. So here I have a desert dust and a burnt umber, and I'm just going to use those to add a bit more texture to our base. So firstly I'm going to use the umber, and for this it's just a case of just getting a bit on a brush. This goes everywhere, by the way. It's not the not the easiest of things to work with and keep tidy, and I'm going to concentrate with this umber on the areas where I've got the rocks. I'm just going to sort of brush it into the formations a little bit. As I said, it's just for that bit more variation. It does build up, it's just keep working with it. It just brings those rocks back and gives them a bit more of an earthy, darker texture. Splash it on, and then I can work as much as it off as I need to, really. But it builds those areas up nicely. I'm going to work with that one a little bit now, and I'll get back to you when I do the next stage. So our umber area is done, and we're going to do exactly the same with the desert dust. In fact, I'm going to put it just to the side there to work a bit of it off, and then I'm just going to dab what I've got into the other areas. As you can see, it's quite powerful. So after I've done this, as well as a soft brush, you can use a slightly harder brush. Still be careful of all your texture you've done, don't go brushing all your texture off. But you can work off some of this. But that really adds that element more of texture to this base and just makes it pop that little bit more. I'm quite happy with that. That's looking good. As well as skulls, you can add other things like the little static grass bits and pieces to it. Try to find maybe some burnt grass or dried grass which you could stick on as little clumps, just as more visual interests. But that is our desert base done, and I hope you find that is really effective, but also really quick and really easy to do. You know, you can do this without an airbrush and at very basic skill level and come up with a lovely visual, textured, interesting base like that to make your models really pop. What I will do is I'm going to put one of my orc buggies on this, a Boomdacker Snazwagon, and I think it's going to look awesome. And what I'll do is I'll wrap the video up. Alright, I have actually added some of the brown greeny grass tufts to the base just to make it pop a little bit more as well, like I said. And it just really does bring it out a little bit, just to add a bit of green to it. What you can do is when you mount your model on there, you will seal it with varnish anyway, which will help to seal the base. But also if you want to protect it that little bit more, you can use some more of the Geek Gaming Scenics matte scenic sealant. Just pump a couple of sprays on top to keep everything where it is. And that's it. Now I definitely will wrap the video up. And that's the end of our video on painting this wonderful desert themed scenic base you can use for your armies. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please like, subscribe and share. I'm not a shop or a company. I don't have much. I'm just a guy in his man cave doing his hobby with a light and a digital camera. So it means so much to me when people comment or like or even subscribe. It's a truly massive thing. Thank you very much. I also have a MiniModelMakes Facebook page. You can go on there. Sometimes I release some photos of what I'm working on or what video I'm going to be doing next. It'd be nice to see people on there and leaving me messages. As I said, I really hope you enjoyed that video. I hope that inspires you to do some desert bases, or I hope that gives you some tips on using little bits and pieces to add a bit of life or interest to your base, or even how to make the most of using the Crackle paint that I used on the base for you. Okay, that is it for now. I'm not too sure what my next video is going to be at the moment. We're coming to the end of lockdown with a bit of luck here in the UK. I hope it's the same for anyone else out there in the world. Bye for now. Take care. Once more, please like, subscribe and share. See you soon.